independence pushed us in a certain direction. We've got to move back to that point of having these multiple discourses.
Good night, viewers. Welcome to this weekly Wednesday night Globespan 24x7 live talk show where we bring critical, relevant issues that affects Guyana's development. My name is Salim Nausrudeen, and I'll be your moderator for tonight. We are having a very lively show tonight. I know we're competing with the Amazon Warrior who are playing tonight, and we wish them all the best. And hopefully Guyana will win the ultimate prize at the end of the CPL. With that said, again, this is live. This is a live program on Facebook as well as on YouTube. So please, if you're looking, and I'm sure you are looking if you're hearing me, please share this video to your friends and families. And a quick reminder that the views and comments expressed on this show does not represent that of the management of Globespan 24x7, its principal, myself, the moderator. It's wholly and solely that of our panelists. Tonight, our topic is local content, what's in it for us. We do have a poll tonight, and the poll is about whether you believe Guyana and Guyana's government and other stakeholders are ready for first oil, which is just a few months from now. So we're talking oil, and you'll be hearing a lot about oil for many more years to come. In fact, tomorrow, Fair Deal Guyana is having a similar discussion on oil at the Cyril Potter School of Cyril Potter College, Teachers College, I believe. Getting oil right will see significant upskilling of our people and the retooling and technological upgrading of our private sector and businesses in order to maximize benefits to the local economy. Harnessing and prudent management of our oil and gas can and should be significant catalysts for Guyana to move forward, move out of poverty and on a rapid path towards economic prosperity. The good news is that 16 wells have been found so far, 2 only this week, with a total reserve in the vicinity of 5 billion barrels and maybe even more. Getting oil wrong, however, will see yet another Guyanese natural resource referred to as potential, as in the case with all of our many natural resources. Our effective management of these resources, our ineffective management of our resources, never-ending political instability, growing corruption, added to our lack of readiness for oil, are all signs that we may inevitably be heading for another round of underdevelopment. I hope, and I hope it's your hope, that this is not the case. However, with only a few months to go, we don't have an approved local content policy, no oil and gas legislation, an effective Department of Energy, and as you all know, a continued political rancor. So where are we heading? To help you and I navigate the murky world of oil and to deal with these challenging Guyanese situations, I have 2 very qualified and experienced oil and gas professionals. My first guest, of course, is Anthony Paul. Paul is a Trinidadian-based energy and strategy advisor, currently supporting countries new to the oil and gas industry. Paul is an advisor to the Department of Energy, I believe, on Guyana local content policy, and the author of the first 2 local content policy drafts. My other guest is Dr. John Mangal. He's an oil and gas professional. He has worldwide experience working with governments in their oil sector, a background in project management, decision analysis, facilitation, project economics, and a PhD in offshore geotechnical engineering. He's currently focused on ensuring good governance in Guyana's oil and gas sector, and so it can be meaningfully benefit Guyanese today and future generations. Welcome, Anthony, and welcome, Jan. Hope I got it right there.
Thank you.
Dr. Jan and Dr. Anthony, Mr. Anthony, thank you very much for your time out and spending it with us tonight. Before we get into the meat of the matter for tonight, I just want to ask a quick question on the bombing of the facilities in Saudi Arabia. How would it impact Guyana's oil industry in the immediate and near future?
If you want me to go first, Jan. Sure. First of all, let me correct it. I'm not an advisor to the Department of Energy. I have met with them very briefly, but I did advise the Minister of Natural Resources before the oil transfer to the Department of Energy. In terms of the Saudi situation, the investments in Guyana are very profitable at very low oil prices compared even to onshore Permian oil in the US. Mm-hmm. So price drops of $50 will make a lot of money for Guyana still. The situation in Saudi, as you know, this is so vital to the Saudis and the world. They will put everything behind it to repair the damage. And already they've brought some more production on stream. They've given open budgets to engineering and construction firms. Just go and fix it. So they will get it done. The biggest challenge they will have is what are called long lead items. Things that have been broken that take a long time to get to remake. Yeah, and those are probably in the order of months and not years. Mm-hmm. The good thing is you have to do engineering, which takes time. The engineering is already there. So it's, they may have to do some minor engineering, but the major plans these are repairs and maintenance jobs. So I don't see a long lead time for that to come up. Guyana's production will come before that comes back up fully, of course, with the Lisa 1. Yeah. So that might impact global prices as it has, but to the positive, prices have gone up on the falling in Saudi oil production. They may stay up for a little bit, but the market is quite fickle. As we know, there are lots of surplus oil in storage. That can, for a while, at least offset the shortfall in Saudi production.
Dr. Jan, your thoughts on how this may affect Guyana's oil adventures?
So I agree completely with what Tony has said. And just to add one item is that we don't want to focus too much on near-term oil price. These projects are an investments by Exxon and others in countries like Guyana. They're looking 20, 30 years ahead. So I know people focus a lot on oil price and what's happening in the oil market today, but it's a very difficult thing to predict, oil price. And all companies know that they can't make decisions based on these near-term kind of fluctuations like we're seeing. I suppose the bigger issue around that attack or the event or whatever you want to call it in Saudi Arabia is more for the stability of the region as a longer-term issue.
Well, thank you guys for that. And of course, we hope that the stability of that region is maintained so it doesn't rattle other parts of the world and other markets. And this is a question for both of you now, just to get a grounding on who you are and what you do or what you did as it relates to Guyana's oil industry. Please advise our viewers on your past and current role as it relates to Guyana oil and the oil industry. And if you can start, Dr. Jan, with what you've been involved in the past and, of course, current.
So I'll start with my education. My PhD was in oil and gas for a North Sea oil platform. Then I worked away from the industry for a couple of years, but I joined a major oil company in 2002, and that was in Houston as a facilities engineer. And I worked in the U.S. projects in West Africa, Angola, Nigeria. For example, building a gas to liquids facility in the Niger Delta in Nigeria. I was in charge of civil structural discipline for that. Then I became interested in project economics and investment analysis and looking at, modeling these projects, these billion-dollar projects. I did that in Chevron for a bit. Then we moved to Vietnam for a gas to power project. In Vietnam, we were looking at offshore gas, bringing it to shore, building a power plant. But there's a huge demand for energy in Vietnam. You know, it has a growing population, a very young population. So it is desperate. After that, I moved to the Philippines as a project manager for another gas to power project, which was, we were producing gas already, but we put in a new platform and some new wells, deep water wells, and my job was project manager for that for Chevron. Then I left Chevron, and around the same time, Guyana found oil. And I did some pro bono work for the president in 2016. And that's the first time I met Mr. Anthony Paul. We actually were in the summer of 2016 in Guyana together, where Anthony did a rapid assessment of Guyana's oil industry. So in 2017, the formal position started advising the president of Guyana on oil and gas. And that was paid for by the IDB, which is the Inter-American Development Bank. My role with the president was to look out for the long-term interest for Guyana around oil and gas. There were two contracts, 2 6-month contracts. So that took me to end of March 2018. Then the decision was, you know, do I move to Guyana on a full-time basis, which I couldn't do because I was in Houston with a family. I was rotating kind of between Guyana and Houston when I was advising the president. And my last deliverable to the president was the implementation plan or the proposal for the new Department of Energy. So since then, since March of 2018, I stuck with Guyana because I knew there was a need. I could see it blatantly. There was a need for people to push Guyana's agenda, to push the issues which are important to Guyana, not just the industry agenda. So I've been doing that now for about 1.5 years, and I decided to take some time off just to do that, to write and do that, and that's what I've been doing. That's coming to an end now, and I'm, you know, looking at other opportunities.
Good. And Mr. Anthony, what has been your role in the Guyana oil industry, you know, for the past few years, and what's your current role in that industry, in the Guyana oil industry?
So, sure. So my background, very quickly, is I am a geologist and geophysicist by training. I spent 13 years in the Trinidad and Tobago government, as 6 of those as Director of Geology and Geophysics. I headed up the geophysics department at Petrotrin, the national company. I was exploration manager at Amoco Trinidad, and then we merged with BP. I went to London and worked in strategy in BP in a role that looked at how do we get more value from our business assets across the world, across the value chain, by using technology. And at that time, I spent some time in Azerbaijan working on what became their local content strategy. I came back to Trinidad and I ran BP's oil fields for a while we tried to divest them, which we did. And then I became development manager, sustainable development manager it was called. How do we develop our natural gas fields in a sustainable manner? And doing that, I recognized the value, based on the experience I had with BP in London, the value that the country can access from the opportunities. And I wrote Trinidad and Tobago local content policy. And I've been sitting on the local content committee there since then. I left BP in 2003. I went out to consult because I saw that governments understood how oil and gas businesses operate, but they understand the business itself, and were therefore giving me a lot of value. At that point, I had 25 years experience, and I said, you know what, governments need to do better at this. So I spent time in several countries in Africa, writing policies in Ghana, Kenya, supporting people in Tanzania right there, and working with the regulators, setting up their systems and procedures in Nigeria, in Ghana. I've done a lot of work in other countries in Africa, in Bolivia, in Peru, some in Equatorial, but in a few places in the world. And while I was in Ghana, I spent 2 years in Ghana as advisor to the minister, setting up the Petroleum Commission and reorganizing the ministry. The UNDP invited me to Guyana to answer the question, what is the current state of Guyana in terms of its readiness to manage this oil and gas industry that's just been discovered, 2015. So I spent a few months writing this analysis of the state of readiness and making recommendations on the way forward in terms of legislation, institutions, capability, administration, and so on. And then while I was doing that, I was asked, can I help the government draft a local content policy? So I did that on my spare time kind of thing. And that was the first draft. And subsequent to that, I was asked, can that went out for comments and feedback. And I was asked to do a review of that based on those comments. Then took it on a roadshow around Guyana. And then got more feedback and put that into that second draft, which was then handed to the government, and it was the last, my last engagement in Guyana, except as I said, a very short stint visiting recently.
Are you also involved in advising local companies or any local organizations? For example, Oil Now?
No, I mean, people would call me and ask questions, and I'll give advice and information. I'm a true believer in helping people understand the industry and educating people. So that's why I was happy to come on here and to help people understand the industry. And the reason for that is I found out in Trinidad that our people, as much as oil and gas has run our economy, our people do not understand the industry. And it's at their peril because the government and the state entities run it in a form of secrecy. Yeah, that is actually against the written legislation, in my view, and they run it badly in the last couple of decades, and the people just don't know, And my generation, I think, should take some responsibility for that because we didn't make an effort to educate the population, so they can themselves challenge the government, and not only challenge it in a negative way, lend support to the government. One thing I always tell the populations where I work is that you own this oil and gas. The government works for you. The government has a limited number of minds. You and I know that 2 heads are better than 1. Well, 1,000,000 heads are better than 10. Yeah. So every criticism that is made of the government is made in respect of getting a better deal for the country. Mm-hmm. And governments have to understand that the population is on their side. Yeah. But in Trinidad, people have thin skins, so it's not easily taken.
And you had mentioned that you were taken on by UNDP to study the readiness of Guyana in the oil and gas sector. In a nutshell, were we ready, and what areas were most critical in our not being ready or being ready?
Sure. So I looked at what it takes to regulate or to manage the sector. I looked at the legal framework. I looked at the administrative framework. I looked at what did the Constitution say, what did the law say, what did the regulations say, what did the contract say. And then I said, let's look at what is needed to run the industry. Right, in that respect, in terms of legislation, regulation, and contracts. Mm-hmm. Identified gaps. Yeah, identified how some mechanisms to close those gaps. And then I looked at the administration. What skills do you need to run this? How many people? What kinds of organization? What tools and procedures do they need? What capacity, in other words, what technology? And then I looked at what was in place at GGMC at the ministry at the time, and recommended changes in two ways. I said, one, you need to have experienced people with knowledge working immediately to help the current situation because operations are ongoing. While you're doing that, you need to build a strong local team to run for the long term. And my recommendation was do those things in parallel, but whoever you hire and identify some specific skills and competencies required to be made the day-to-day operations. Whoever you hire, make sure that the part of the responsibility is to mentor, train, and develop the locals who are being hired and to help build the systems and procedures, the tools for the organization that you're building. Yeah? So that is not rocket science. It's just common sense, but it's the way I look at how any business is run, how the oil business is run, how I've seen it run in different countries. So I'm saying to Guyana, I said to Guyana, this is where you are, this is what you need, this is a suggestion on how to close the gaps.
So I would imagine that was almost at the starting line for Guyana oil and sector being ready. So Mr. Yan, Dr. Yan, sorry, I've been listening to some of your videos and I've read some of your articles, and there is a passion and love for Guyana in your voice and in your tone and of course in your language. You were practically an unknown before 2016, 2017. Some say that you might be a lobbyist for a certain oil company. Can you shed some light on this? Is there any truth to this? And where's this sudden love for Guyana coming from?
So the only reason I'm involved in Guyana is because President Granger asked me to come and help and advise. It's probably unlikely that I would have been involved in Guyana or doing what I'm doing if I didn't have that role. And that role was an excellent way to get up to speed and to understand all the issues, current issues. Now, no one knew me, but I was in Guyana every year since I left. I went abroad. I left high school in Guyana in 1985, since, and I went away for university every year since. I've been back to Guyana. I have family down there. But so that's one question. I'm an unknown. That's fine. I don't think that's an issue. I'm actually happy that I'm an unknown. When I look at all the knowns who've been knocking around for so long, to have a clean slate is actually a good thing in Guyana. So then you asked the question about, am I some sort of lobbyist for an oil company? And I think I've heard that from Mr. Robert Prasad. He's the one who was a former Minister of Natural Resources who was asked that directly on Facebook. So I have to assume it's because I worked for an oil company before, which is not Exxon. No, I left Chevron in 2016. I have no connection to Chevron. And if you want a good indicator of my independence right now, when I stopped the direct award of contracts, the current ministry wanted to do direct awards for Block C, which is one of the last remaining big blocks. And I wrote in the newspapers and I advised that there should be no secret direct awards because Guyana loses out. And those types of awards, secret awards, are highly prone to corruption. When I stopped that, it was Chevron who was one of the companies trying to obtain it. So I stopped Chevron in addition to many other companies who were probably trying to obtain that. So that allegation that I'm somehow a lobbyist for an oil company doesn't hold any weight. So why am I doing what I'm doing? This is what Guyanese, the elites and the powerful in Guyana, are baffled by. They think, oh, Jan's taking time off doing what he's doing. There must be some money or some ulterior motive. No, there isn't. What I'm doing, I can't do forever because I need to earn money soon. But I decided to take some time off to do what I'm doing now, because Guyana is a perfect test. Guyana is an experiment. For someone like Anthony Paul and myself who know the industry well, we've seen all the disasters around the world. To have a little country like Guyana with this huge opportunity to actually prove to the world that we can do oil and gas properly, that we can do oil and gas without all the corruption, that we can do oil and gas with competent institutions and officials, that we can do oil and gas in a way that all the value benefits the man in the street, the woman in the street, and not just the companies and not just the officials. Mm-hmm. This is a huge opportunity. And for me, it's an experiment. It's a problem to solve. It's just a very interesting problem to solve. But most of the signs I've been seeing up till now are not good. Yeah. And it's quite sad.
Yeah, and in a recent radio interview, you mentioned that when you were hired as the advisor to the president on oil and gas, you were not aware that there was a signed contract, and you even opined that you even the president might not be aware at that time of a signed contract for oil, for a petroleum contract. So was that part of you? What was your relationship with the administration, the current administration, with the president, with the with the Minister of Natural Resources and so on. Did these comments or these internal discussions affect your relationship, which led to maybe only 1 year tenure with the administration?
So we are kind of drifting off the local content topic, but I'll answer it because it is. I know a lot of people ask that question. I was advising the president. I wasn't advising the ministers. Most of my time there, the 13 months I spent there, was challenging ministers, was stopping ministers, was stopping ideas and proposals that were being put forward by ministers and others, and advising the president to stop them. When I started, one of my top items was transparency, and I think Tony will mention this about the need for transparency in this industry, but I wanted to get all the contracts released. Another item was to get a better fair value in the Stabroek Block contract, and that's the one you're talking about. But within a month or two, Exxon, when I went to talk to Exxon about it, they told me, oh, we have a signed contract already. And I was like, wow, I didn't even know that. And then I went to the president, and he wasn't aware of it. So, but you have to recall that the ministers who were involved in that signing of the contract in 2016 and aware of it, they really played it down. They pretended it was just a tweak. There are articles in the newspapers where ministers said, oh, no, we didn't really change the contract. We just tweaked some things. So that was how they were trying to keep it quiet. But we know now, luckily the president took the decision to publish all the contracts, which was a momentous and very important decision for Guyana. That's why we can have all of these debates, and so many people are looking at the contract now in detail and analyzing it. That's because the president published the contract.
Yeah.
So that it was very important to get that contract published.
Good. And and I want to ask both of you this. And of course, the contract was shrouded with the $80 million, which most Guyanese felt was just crumbs, and there was some secrecy in it, corruption, and so on. Can the current contract be renegotiated? Both of you guys seems to be very, very experienced in the industry around the world. Have these contracts been relooked and renegotiated, and can they be?
Well, from my experience, yes, contracts can be renegotiated. In fact, this contract, the Stabroek contract, was renegotiated in 2015, 2016. Yeah. So from time to time, one party decides they want something else, something different, and it puts the contract on the table for discussion. As it was, the contract came to the table, it was renegotiated, and a second outcome came. Yeah. But people tend to think that the contract is the only mechanism the government has to getting value or getting conditions favorable to the country. Within a contract, companies always have to conduct activities, and those activities have requirements to meet other kinds of standards or practices. So, for instance, we know that every discovery then converts the license to a production license. Every development, every production requires a field development plan to be approved. Each of these new licenses or plans can have terms and conditions that will reflect the specifics of that activity. So, as we've heard from the Stabroek Block, for instance, we haven't seen it, but we've heard that the development plan has additional local content requirements beyond what's in the legislation or the license or the contract. Yeah. So the opportunity is there, and governments have to understand how to work these things, where the value is. So we had a long history in Trinidad of doing that kind of thing, saying, fine, let's sit down and talk about this. You need that. And that's the kinds of things I advise governments, that local content doesn't start and end with legislation, nor does it start and end with contract. It ends with the implementation. And that's where the specific operation plans, operating procedures, that's where activities value can be created. Yeah.
And Dr.
So anytime.
I want to bring you in again. If we are going to be negotiating, what are some of the key areas you believe we need to be looking at in that renegotiation?
So people speak of various terms: royalty, profit share, tax. Tax is another important variable. But we have to look at the overall take. This is when you lump all the various terms together and you look at the value over the 20 years of the contract. And that's a good variable, the overall take, to compare different countries and different contracts. And with Guyana, Guyana's getting about, on just the Liza 1 project, about 52%. So the Liza 1 project is about half, 450 million barrels, about half a billion barrels over 20 years. That'll bring in about $14-15 billion overall. At 52%, that gets split between the foreign partners and the government. But my view is it shouldn't be 52%. If we bring it up to what's a norm in the industry, it should be more like 67, 70%. So then we would shift about $2.6 billion from the foreign partners to Guyana. And that's just for the first project. So overall take is a good variable. There are various ways to get that up from 52 to 67. We could increase the royalty. And then we should also put tax in, just regular tax. There's no tax right now.
Thanks.
But this is not going to be easy. All companies, and especially Exxon, will resist this all the way. And countries like Guyana just have to keep bashing on. They just have to keep the pressure on and look for, and it's not just a contract. Tony was talking about local content. We have to look at other mechanisms to extract value for the country. So we have to get value in the contract, and we need to, Liza 1 is probably gone. Liza 2 shouldn't have been approved, but that's been approved. Well, Payara, let's not approve Payara. Let's hold Payara until we get a better deal. And then on the subsequent project, probably get a better deal as well. And then on the local content, look for ways to bring more value to the country. Pipeline. We should have had a pipeline as part of Liza 2, a natural gas pipeline back to shore. When I was advising the president, I pushed that. And Exxon created a project team. Exxon was doing engineering work on a pipeline. They were doing surveys. And there was a plan to bring gas to shore and build a power plant. After I left, that seems to have disappeared because Liza 2 was approved and there was no pipeline project approved. Bringing natural gas to shore, for me, is a huge local content boost for Guyana. It's not only building the power plant on shore. If we have cheap electricity, we can encourage, say, a factory from Manaus, 5,000 employees, manufacturing factory, to move up to the coast with cheap electricity, or other types of manufacturing up to Guyana. So you're talking tens of thousands of jobs with cheap electricity.
Absolutely, yeah. And so, and it comes back to the whole content of our discussion tonight, which is about local content. And the president of the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce, Nicholas Boyer, he said in an interview, I think last night or the night before, that we can't rely on just luck to get where we want to go. We need a plan that looks on how we are going to get more Guyanese participation in the industry. I think what he's referring to is a local content policy. So we can open a discussion now about local content policy. And I think both of you are pretty much well qualified to talk about this. What is a local content policy? And what would it take for us to develop one?
Let me start by kicking off from where Jan ended there and give a sense of where the value in oil and gas is. And Jan made the point that, yes, there's revenue from taxes and royalties. And yes, there's value from taking raw material and creating products. So in a sense, there are different ways to get value. One, taxes and royalties, that's a given. Yeah, you have to get the numbers right. But if you look at Guyana's contracts, for instance, when Guyana sells its oil, every barrel of oil, every dollar from every barrel of oil is used to recover every penny spent in costs. Taxes and royalties only come from profits. Yeah, and profits in Guyana's case, in most contracts, 75% goes to costs recovery, 25% to profit. Of that, 12.5%, or half of that, 12.5% goes in taxes. So Guyana gets 12.5% of the barrel, in addition to the 2% royalty. Yeah? That 75% is money spent by the E&P companies on services, on goods, on people. Local content targets that 75%. It says if Guyana can get 10% of that, that means Guyana gets 7.5% of every barrel sold, in addition to the 12.5%. That is very significant. That is what local content is targeting. Getting Guyanese to work for, provide goods and services to the oil and gas industry so that they're paid in Guyana and money stays in Guyana. So that's one aspect of it, and that's why this thing is so important. The other aspect of that is that you don't get local content unless you have local capability, meaning people are trained up, companies have equipment, technology procedures, there's infrastructure facilities, government permission processes to help the industry to work well, right? That is creating, that's what we call capacity building. Capacity building is a pre-requirement. Now, if you look at Guyana today, you're building a whole bunch of yards, shore bases. Guyana will build deep water harbors. Why? Because the industry will need it, and the industry can afford to pay for it. That is capacity building, for the industry. But importantly, that capacity is now available to other sectors of the economy. If you train welders to the industry standard that they needed, you can train 100 welders, you may only hire 10. That 10 comes with local content. The other 90 is capacity building that can be used in other sectors, construction, manufacturing. Yeah. Now, Trinidad and Tobago exports a lot of food, processed food to Guyana. Why? Because we have good electricity. You get natural gas to Guyana, you will have electricity, reliable electricity, affordable electricity. That could do wonders for the agricultural industry if it's managed well. Yeah. So the challenge that Guyana will face, as Trinidad has faced, is that revenue from oil makes it easy for the government to control the population behavior, how it is versus funding, and therefore it can destroy other sectors of the economy. In Trinidad, the government went about moving labor from opposition areas to government areas by giving jobs in those areas, and therefore denuding the agriculture industry of the workforce and killing it. So you can add value, or you can erode value in other sectors. And that's why a policy and implementation are so important.
But you're saying some really nice things. But my question was, do we have a local content in Guyana, and what would it take for us to develop one, given that first oil is literally months away?
Jan, do you want to go ahead, Jan. Yeah.
Okay. So I believe Tony mentioned he worked on some initial drafts, and in my view, Tony should be the one working on the draft now, because Tony is a local content expert. The person who they hired, who is affiliated with Exxon, which is kind of a conflict to me, who they've hired to work on the local content now. You don't hire, as a government, you don't hire contractors and service companies who are affiliated with or somehow dependent on the oil company you're trying to regulate. But that's what happened with the local content, the latest local content draft. I think as is Mr. Warner, it's said that he worked for Exxon or in some ways is connected with Exxon. So we were hearing a lot about local content. And Tony mentioned, how important it is with respect to the revenue, the royalty, and the taxes. I agree completely with Tony, but I also am more focused on the other side, what Guyana can do with the royalty and the taxes, meaning the revenue. So local content comes from the cost, the money that's spent in the industry, and then trying to get a high proportion of that to the country. But I'm more focused on the billions of dollars that Guyana should be getting with a fair deal. if we increase the royalty and the tax to a fair number, we will get 30 billion US dollars, assuming there's 10 billion barrels in Stabroek Block and, some big assumptions. But that is 30 billion plus 30 billion US dollars that we are forfeiting, given to Exxon and Hess for no reason. Well, think if we got that money, what can Guyana do with that money? That kind of dwarfs what you can do with the local content from the cost side. So if Guyana has this $30 billion and we don't waste it, we don't squander it, that's this with some of that, completely new infrastructure in Guyana, new roads, new bridges, new hospitals, new schools, a new university. Think of how many teachers that'll employ, how many doctors, how many construction workers. You're talking thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of people. Mm-hmm. Versus if we just focus on the local content, this industry is all offshore. Even if we do very well and attract a lot of it in terms of local content into Guyana, we're limited in how much jobs there are because it's all offshore. So I just want to bring that perspective that, local content is very important, but we also cannot miss the bigger opportunity, which is the revenue.
Yeah.
Another point is why we're hearing a lot about local content now is because of the private sector in Guyana. Businessmen, they want a piece of the pie. So they want to mandate local content. They want Guyanese companies, for example, to have 51% in, say, oil and gas service companies in Guyana, but that's not right. And Tony is the expert in this. Tony would probably disagree. He can explain. But my view is, we shouldn't mandate percentages of ownership to local companies. The objective of local content is jobs. So what we need to mandate is jobs. We need to mandate that so many Guyanese this year are going to be doing these type of jobs. Next year is going to increase to this many, more jobs. And you have a plan. You have a plan for the next 10 years based on how many FPSOs and how many jobs need to be Guyanese. But we should not mandate company ownership.
Well, I know in Anthony, your, I think, second draft included that companies operating in Guyana should have or consider 51% ownership by a Guyanese entity. Is that something you still embrace?
No, I didn't say that. I didn't put any number on local ownership. What I did say is that Guyanese businesses should participate. And the reason for that is that oil and gas industry has a finite life. I agree with Jan, we shouldn't focus on jobs. The industry doesn't generate a lot of jobs. What we should focus on is skills. Yeah? The industry develops skills that are transferable to other sectors as well. So if you have big equipment being used offshore, those things get damaged. They need to be repaired. Typically, right now, they're being shipped out of Guyana to Trinidad or overseas. Yeah? You build a great machine shop in Guyana that could take a block of steel and build a part using computer-aided cutting machines. Yeah? You can repair any machine for any factory or mine in Guyana. What does that do for your productivity of your manufacturing sector if you have one? People need to operate those machines, so they need those skills. But you're building capacity, one, that can work in the industry and take those jobs, but two, that can allow Guyanese to build and operate in other sectors of the economy and support sustainability. Now, the reason I say you want companies to grow is that one of the reasons we struggle, quite frankly, in our part of the world is the quality of corporate governance and the quality of the management systems in companies. Inefficiency in Trinidad is just as poor in the public sector as the private sector. Yeah? So, but if you work for the oil companies, you have to have operating standards, you have to have governance systems, you have to have health and safety procedures, you have to have systems and procedures that match the quality of the industry. Now, keep in mind, these companies, you're talking about are world-leading companies. Not just world-leading oil and gas companies, world-leading companies. It means they know how to use technology. you know how to develop people? Do you know how to manage finance, how to manage risk? Imagine working with them, what that can do for your local companies. If you raise the standard of your companies, then you raise the standard of living in Guyana. Secondly, and this is also an important point, Jan is right. If you focus on collecting as much tax as you can, there's a big impact on what government can do. But if you depend on government only to be the fuel of the economy, you know where that can lead. Yeah. If you have other sources of revenue, other sources of creating capital, then the economy has other sources of fuel. So I would suggest you look at both of them, but you certainly do not forego your taxes, go after those, but do not look as if local content is there only to get a few jobs in the industry. That is, you get the jobs, but you also build the capacity. And as I said before, local content and local value addition is the way I would describe it. So how do you make sure that natural gas comes ashore and creates value for Guyana, creates power, creates fertilizers, helps manufacturing?
And I think that's the big question that a local content policy should be answering. And we'll get back to that just in a few minutes. But I think we have someone in the audience in Richmond Hill that may have a question. Devin, can you bring on Mr. Philip Anthony?
Yes, one moment.
And this is a live show. We are talking local content, what's in it for us Guyanese. And with me is our two experienced professionals in the field, Dr. Jan Mangal and Anthony Paul. Please, if you're looking at this show, please share to your friends and families on Facebook, as well as a link maybe on YouTube. Devin, are you ready?
Oh, this is interesting. I didn't know I was going to get behind the camera. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to discuss this. My question really is, oil-producing countries is nothing new. There are just under 100 OPCs around the world, and all of them are somewhere around 50 years old. So why not simply follow the best practices of the top two, Norway and Qatar in particular, because I believe what you're talking about in terms of local content is one avenue, but there's also a financial avenue in terms of collateralizing the resource as opposed to cutting it up into a pizza pie. At some point, after 8 slices of the pie, no one is satiated. Everyone is still hungry.
So Jan or Anthony, you guys want to take a stab at that?
I'll take a stab on the best practices. Yeah, and that goes back to my test. This is a test. It's been done so many times before, and look at all the failures. There are some success stories, but look at the failures. It's clear what we need to do, and it's much more clear what we should not be doing. There's so many best practices out there Guyana needs to follow. Transparency, releasing contracts, the local content aspects that Tony talks about, trying to get a fair deal on your fiscal terms. Also, not becoming too dependent on the industry. There's what I think Tony mentioned is this is about skills, it's not about jobs. As quickly as those oil and gas jobs come, they can go. The oil price is highly volatile. We see, countries that invest too much in oil, when there's a downturn, they get burnt. You have people on the streets. And Guyana is a small place. We can't have too many people in the industry. We have to keep it at a distance. So there are so many best practices, and in my view, we should be following them, but we're not following enough of them.
Anthony, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, people say this thing as if it's a given. Let's get somebody's model and copy it. But Guyana is nobody but Guyana, and if you want a model to work, it must be customized to your situation and your desires. So I always tell people, if you want a model and you want to learn from other people, work at it. Understand where you are, what you have, where you want to go. Yeah? And then figure out, look at it, figure out what it takes to get there. Yeah? And then ask, so who has walked this road already? And who has done it well? And let's pick and choose from each path that is taken to get to that end state. Let's look at what Nigeria did in this case. Let's look at what Ghana did in this case. Let's look at what Norway did in this case. Let's look at Nova Scotia. Let's look at Texas. The big countries, Alaska, they've done really well as well. Australia. You know, people talk about you shouldn't put laws in place for local content. Well, guess what? All these countries had laws at some time, or still do. You know, Canada signs contracts with countries and say you shouldn't put in place national local content policy, blah, 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 because we don't have it. They haven't got it, but guess what? They have provincial local content laws. Australia does the same thing. They have state laws, not national laws. Yeah? So I would say this. I would say Guyana's local content policy and Guyana's development plan for oil and natural gas must be Guyana's. It has to be rooted in an understanding of what Guyana is and where Guyana wants to go. And every time I come to Guyana, I look at your coat of arms and I ask the question, what does one destiny mean? Where is that conversation happening? If you can tell me where that destiny is, I can write you a better local content policy.
Absolutely. And that's exactly, I think, where we want to take the discussion. We've been talking about jobs, we've been talking about upskilling, we've been talking about capacity building and so much more over the last 45 minutes. But the crux of the matter is, if we don't have a content policy, how do we guide the industry? And so the question is, what do we have a content policy in Guyana? All I'm hearing is drafts. We're on the third draft. And what's preventing us from embracing and approving a content policy for Guyana moving forward in the immediate and, of course, in after 2020? What's the holdup?
So let me take one. Yeah, go ahead, Jan. Yeah.
Even though we've been at this since 2015, we have to recognize that in terms of capacity, institutional capacity, and people, we're still quite far behind. In Guyana, we really don't have the people. For Guyana to succeed, for any endeavor, for any project to succeed, it's all about the people. It doesn't matter what you have on paper. You need the people. We don't have the people. And these are not Guyanese I'm talking about. You need experienced oil and gas professionals, people who spent 20, 30 years in the industry, probably retired. We need to get like dozens of them down. And around each of those individuals, we'll have like 5 Guyanese, bright Guyanese, who will be learning. So in a couple of years' time, we'll have, multiple, an extrapolation of Guyanese who are skilled, but we need to get that core expertise down, and we don't have it. And I think that's why we're seeing this slow down, and then all the political issues in Guyana as well. The uncertainty. It's unfortunately, politicians think election to election, and that's probably slowing us down a bit too. Tony?
Yeah, Tony, you were very. You were knee-high in the local content policy draft and so on. Why don't we have one? What's taking this long? And are we going to ever have one?
You have local content happening. What a policy does is guide it, make it more efficient. Yeah. So the starting point is understand what you want to become, right? What you want out of the oil and gas industry. Yeah. What is your vision for the sector in terms of how it supports Guyana's development and its people and the nation? And that is what I try to use to formulate a policy. Because all the policy does is says, if we want to get from point A to point B, we have to work in a coordinated way. And these are the principles that get us there. Right? Now, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm told a policy doesn't have the force of law. It cannot be enforced. You can't take somebody to court for not following a policy. Yeah. So if you want to make sure everybody follows the policy, that's why you put it in legislation. And all that does is say, here are the rules, folks, that everybody must follow. So it's clear and it's common. What that does is allows people to act in a similar way so that they can build on each other. Yeah. Now, local content has 3 parts. It's the capacity building part, it's the actual engagement of people and services, And then is the value addition, as I described earlier, in creating and supporting other industries. Yeah. So that, I think, can happen now. So you can say, as Jan quite rightly said, there aren't many Guyanese who can do the jobs at the moment. But as the jobs are happening, Guyanese can be trained on the job. Now, many, like, back in the 70s and 80s, we all rode drank from the same Kool-Aid. I mean, it's a poor analogy for Guyana. But we did actually get advice from the World Bank and others. And we said, you must use local goods and services, provided they are same quality, competitiveness, cost, and delivery as the international providers. Yeah. Now, if you haven't done it before, there's no way you can do it today, right? So if you get excluded on job 1, job 2 comes up, you haven't progressed, you haven't trained, you haven't had experience, you're still not qualified. And job 3 and job 4. Now, as Jan said earlier, this is 20, 30 years, 40 years easily. Yeah. So if you don't start getting experience now, if you don't start getting engaged now, you won't be able to build up capacity to get more Guyanese input. So the local capacity building is a key part. So in the absence of a policy, there must be somebody who's talking to the operators who are spending what will be Guyana's money and say, listen, tell me how you're doing, what you're doing to help Guyanese improve their capability, to get more capacity, more technology, more equipment to support your industry. Yeah. So in the absence of a policy, a regulator who understands the industry and a company who understands that it wants to work in the country's interest to some extent can get local content done. What happens without a clear policy and regulations and guidelines is that it's inconsistent. People do things differently. And quite often, companies do things in their own interest to upgrade their brand. And the things they do may not be the most effective spend of money for the country, but it might be for them. So that coordination is quite important, I think.
And Anthony, you raised a point. I want to stick a pin there. In terms of capacity building and upskilling and so on, whose responsibility is it in an early oil economy like Guyana? Is it the operators? Is it government? Is it private sector? Is it a combination of them? Because as both of you have mentioned, Guyana, from a skill level, it'll be tough to lay upon them a very stringent local content policy because of the skill level. So who's responsible at least to start building the capacity?
So it's difficult and really not quite fair to paint everything with the same brush. So there are skills that Guyanese can employ immediately or very short term, like welding and fabricating. A lot of that goes on, like well services, working in a rig and doing things. Yeah? Guyanese can even become geologists working on geologists can work on well sites, reservoir engineers working on reservoir and computer modeling for reservoirs. That doesn't take 10 years. You can graduate from school and be a proficient engineer geologist in 3 to 5 years. Yeah? But you have to start. Yeah? And if you wait, then a lot of the opportunity to learn is going away. Yes? So it's what do you start? So I think the question you ask is, who's responsible for it? Well, this is Guyana's oil. Guyana has to map its path and let the players know this is what Guyana wants. And work with the players, because the companies, I can tell you, know better than the governments in many places, in all countries, in most countries of the world, than how to do what they want to do. So what the government's role is say, what do I want? And then we'll work with the companies to say how to do it. Yeah? And it's that collaboration that is essential. But the government must be clear on what it wants. The companies, and I don't dispute that Exxon is trying to do some good things through the center and so on. Is that the best use of the energies that Exxon is putting in? Maybe it is from Exxon's perspective. Yeah? But what is Tullow doing and Repsol? And who's coordinating that? And who's making sure you get cohesion rather than competition in building capacity, in winning hearts and minds? Yeah.
And Dr. Yang, can you help us with that? Who is coordinating it at the moment?
Yeah.
There's a Department of Energy, of course, and you were once in the midst of it all. Is there a coordination? Because Nicholas Boyer clearly says that that right now it's luck. And we can't depend on luck for these things. There's got to be a policy. And today's news also has one prominent attorney taking one of the oil company to court for hiring a Guyanese, paying him $72,000 a month, whereas a foreigner is making a whole lot more. So who's on the driving seat right now?
I can't tell you because I'm not involved now, but I can tell you what the plan was. The plan was to, originally Ministry of Natural Resources had everything under Minister Trotman. Then we set up this new Department of Energy, and everything to do with oil and gas is supposed to transition into the new Department of Energy. At one point, I believe the Minister of Business had local content, and I'm not sure, what has transitioned or if it's still in different entities. Another reason for setting up the new Department of Energy is because we were seeing that, Ministry of Public Infrastructure had natural gas, Ministry of Natural Resources had oil, and my view was everything needs to be under one decision-making entity, hence the new Department of Energy. We need everything to do with oil and gas, and also infrastructure and national development, because oil will affect everything. So, I can't answer your question who's responsible, but I kind of told you who should have been responsible. Now, Tony has been touching on a very important point here, destiny. Guyana is a small country. All oil and local content and all of this other stuff, it has to have a place to fit. There's a puzzle. If we don't have that bigger framework of this longer outlook, what are we going to look like in 20 years' time, in 50 years' time? These pieces have nowhere to fit. And right now, we don't really have that framework, this national development plan that's been rolled out across the country, that's had stakeholder input, that has been debated in communities. Guyanese should be there debating for the last couple of years on what they want to be in 50 years' time and how to get there. And if we had that framework or plan, then the local content would just fit straight in there. We know what a better idea was going to look like and everything else. So that point Tony is making about destiny is a very important one.
So if there's no one in the driving seat, are you saying that we're at the mercy of the big oil companies, whether they will hire us or not, whether we have to upskill ourselves and those kind of things? I mean, how is Guyanese, again, come back to the topic, what's in it for us? And the oil is ours, the country is ours, the destiny is ours. However, there's no one that's articulating a path forward or a strategy. So how does a Guyanese welder, for example, or a Guyanese company like Nicholas, how do they maneuver themselves?
So, the oil companies are kind of struggling with Guyana as well. They're trying to do well. They're trying to have a positive impact, like with a local content or the local business development center. They've seen this before all around the world. So they know what works, and they know what would work very well in Guyana, but it would cost them a bit more. Hiring locals is cheap. However, there's the safety aspects, there's the quality aspects. So if we have qualified Guyanese, they will be hired because they're a lot cheaper than hiring foreigners. So, and I think it won't take too long before Guyanese do become qualified. So it's natural that they will become, they'll get hired. But I'll give you an example of one of my projects. My last project with Chevron in the Philippines. We had to build a platform. And the last platform we built it in Singapore and then floated it to the Philippines. So we said, no, let's try and do this in the Philippines so we can have local content. There were no laws. The government didn't tell us that we had to do it. We just decided as a corporation or as a joint venture, we will build this platform in the Philippines. We had to go and train. We had 1,000 welders and fabricators in the shipyard. And over 3 years, we trained 4,000 people because the turnover was so high. We had to train 4 times the amount of people we actually had, just because of turnover, but it was worth the investment. So we actually, as a, with no government push, we just decided as businesses, it made sense for us to do this locally and to train the people locally. A bit of a difference with the Philippines is that, you have a lot of Filipinos in the Middle East, in the industry and elsewhere. So, we had some skilled people we could bring back, but we had to train a lot of people from scratch. So the government has to be proactive, but when these companies decide to do things, it makes sense, and they decide to do stuff, they can do it.
Yeah. And Anthony, do you see any proactive initiative by the current administration to fast forward content policy and to ensure that Guyana gets that fair deal that everyone is eager for?
Well, I only know what I see in the newspapers. And there seems to have been, the new version of the policy is going out for comments among stakeholders. So that tells me they're moving forward on the policy. I've heard that the field development plans have built-in local content requirements. So I'm assuming that same kind of thought is going into new approvals for exploration programs, the production licenses, and so on. But it's not. I mean, as I'm sitting outside of Guyana, I only went to Guyana once in the last 18 months or so. So I'm not sure that I can't tell what's happening, but something is happening. In the absence of a policy and a legislation, it's hard to put a finger on who's accountable. Now, clearly, I mean, there are 2 entities in Guyana who look at oil and gas activities: the Department of Energy, which functions like a ministry, a policy maker, and oversight agency, and the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission, which really is the technical arm. Which if I map that against other countries in the world, that would be the regulator. But the things aren't unclear yet. So that is the entity that would oversee implementation of local content. Why? Because that's the body that will have the technical ability to assess where to get locals to participate and to check whether it's happening. Now, the policy maker, and this is not the state in Guyana by any means, it may not be that, but I'm saying in an ideal world, if you had 2 entities, one would be the policy maker, oversight entity, and the other would be the regulator managing day-to-day operations. So the Department of Energy / ministry, whatever comes out in the future, will be the one to put the policy in place, get regulations in place, and then pass it on to the regulator to oversee its implementation. That may have, in Trinidad's case, our Ministry of Energy does both of them. So Guyana can do any model it wants, but that's in the current scenario, and given the current sped up capability, that's something that could happen. I have no idea how it's actually happening at the moment.
Yeah, but like you said, I think there's something happening, but I believe for the Guyanese contractor and the business community, it's not happening fast enough. That's why you have these court cases, and you've got these comments from business leaders. Now, there's a question from our audience, and it comes back to the contract, so much not so much local content. The question is from Roy Kingston, and he's asking: Is it a normal practice that host country pay 100% of pre-production costs? That's a great question, and I think again, when it comes to Guyana having a fair deal, whether at the local content level or at the contract level, this question plays right in the center of it.
So let me just go with that. So there are 2 places that define what is and isn't allowable, and that's all 3 actually. It's usually in the legislation that governs oil and gas operations. It may be in the contracts, and depending on the nature of the arrangements, it could be in taxes legislation. So in Trinidad's case, we have 2 administrators, one for technical and one for fiscal, and they each have their own laws. Yeah. Now, production sharing contracts are interesting animals in that they were developed essentially for countries who did not have an oil and gas history, and therefore didn't have the legislation in place to regulate it. So the companies came up with this idea, somebody came up with the idea, to let's lump everything into a contract, that it has the effect of law. Yeah, and therein lies the question of what is recoverable. So typically in contracts like that, there are clauses that say what is recoverable, and oftentimes it's cost directly related to the operations to produce oil and gas. Yeah, and it typically is from the date of signing of the contract, from the date of the contract. So costs before that typically aren't recoverable. Yeah, so that it means that costs that are not directly related to oil and gas activities but are borne by the company are not recoverable. In some countries, those costs that are not recoverable are things like CSR, because those aren't directly related. They are brand initiative by the company. Yeah. So that's the nature of, so it's in the contract. So 100% recovery of costs from day one is allowable if it means costs associated with the operations. Now, the Guyana contract may have wording in there that says that some costs aren't recoverable. So, for instance, they may say you may not recover insurance costs. You may not recover loans or interest on loans from your parent company if it surpasses this level, because that's a classic way of companies padding their profits by taking loans from affiliated companies above market rates. Mm-hmm. Yeah? So governments have limited that in some contracts. So there are ways. At one time in Trinidad, when I was at the ministry, and we were trying to get local content because we had people who was killed. A lot of work was being done by the companies overseas in the head offices, and they were charging it back to head offices. And head office cost comes with janitorial services, admin services, rental of buildings. So we, in our production sharing contracts, put a clause in there that says any costs related to operations in Trinidad, that is activities done overseas, will be limited to 10% cost recovery. What that meant is that you had to move the operations to Trinidad if you wanted to recover it. Why did we do that? Because we were hiring dozens of geologists and geophysicists in Houston and none in Trinidad. Absolutely. And we had kids going to school. Yeah. So that is how local content works. It requires you to understand how the industry works and target where you want to get it. Yeah. So in Guyana's case, a lot of work is being done overseas, and no Guyanese has a line of sight of that activity. So Guyanese children ask themselves, and parents ask themselves, what should I send my child to study? How many geologists are working in Guyana today?
Very few.
I don't think it's a lot. Yeah. So you can skew your recoverability, but you have to have a good understanding of how the industry works. And those are the recommendations I made earlier on in terms of what you do today to manage the industry. Get people on board, as Jan says, who know the industry, and they may not be Guyanese at this point, but get the best help you can get. Trinidad and Tobago, when we started right after independence, we had oil for a long time. And we said we need to get the most value from this. You know what we did? We hired an Iranian and an Austrian to come and build our strategy first. Why? Because that Iranian became head of the Iranian National Oil Company. The Austrian was head of the Austrian National Company, which is a downstream company. Yeah, and we brought in experts from outside who knew oil and gas. We put a local to work with them, and we had the population engaged while they were working, and we gave them direction. We said, this is what we want to do. Yeah? And when they came up with their report, that then shaped the petroleum legislation in Trinidad and Tobago and the Ministry of Petroleum and Mines, as it was called at the time. So it built the regulatory and administrative infrastructure to run the industry. And that worked very well for 20 years.
So it's
challenged today.
Yeah, let's get Dr. Yan's response on that. I know you were not aware that a contract was signed when you were on the job, but is it common practice that a host company pay 100% of pre-production cost?
So I was not aware for the first couple of months or first month or so, just to clarify that. Regarding the question on the pre-contract cost, it varies. Like the sense I get in Guyana, the initial conversations I see in the public is they're looking for a way this must be done, the template contract. But in this industry, everybody does things a little bit differently in different countries, different companies. So I think Tony answered that very well. That It depends. And you touched on one thing there about, the youngsters thinking now, do I go to university and do a degree in petroleum engineering or geology, Guyanese youngsters. And if we had clarity on how much of the work will be done in Guyana, like Tony said, in Trinidad, what they did, they brought the engineering service engineering to Trinidad. Nigeria did the same. Angola did the same. If we knew that was going to happen, then the youngsters could plan. But I know youngsters are going off to do petroleum engineering and stuff now, and they may not have the jobs in Guyana. Mm-hmm. But there will be many other jobs. I would actually encourage people to become civil engineers, do medicine, nursing. We need to do so much with the revenue. We need to transform Guyana. We need to rebuild. It's not rebuild. We need to build Guyana from scratch. This is not rebuilding. Yeah. It's not like Venezuela now where they need to rebuild. We actually need to do it now from the start. So there's so many other jobs that are not oil and gas related.
Well, I've been hearing from both of you quite often on this discussion that Guyanese doesn't have the capacity. Guyanese they're not qualified enough. The industry has stringent standards, high standards, and so on. Is that a presumption that Guyanese are not going to get the jobs? That Guyanese companies are not going to get involved in oil and gas, and because it's a very bleak kind of picture when you've got 10 billion barrels of oil on your border, and you can't get involved because everyone is telling you that you're not qualified. How do we get Guyanese qualified, and how do we get them certified so that they can take advantage and they can to build their country?
So I'll just continue on, and then I'll let Tony address that. It's not a bleak picture. When you say people don't have the skills, you're talking about now. It doesn't take long for a young person to learn. Like Tony said, you have bring in, for the very specialist areas, bring in some foreign experts. You put a team of locals around them. The locals will learn within a year, within a couple of years. Probably don't need the foreign expert anymore. So it's not bleak. But those standards are there. They're real. There's no way around them. Safety, whenever you're working, and if you go offshore as well, oil and gas is a very serious business. And we don't, people in the industry, we don't cut corners. At our level, like the working level, financial people can cut corners, but the technical people, when you're offshore and stuff, you don't cut corners with regard to safety and stuff like that. And that's going to be a learning curve, a steep learning curve for Guyanese. Just wearing a hard hat is a problem. Wearing steel-toed shoes instead of flip-flops is a problem, but it's not a problem unique to Guyana. It's the same everywhere. We had the same issues in the Philippines. We had people coming to work drunk, and so then we came up with a scheme. How could we get them to come to work and not be drunk? So we gave them a bonus. So if you come to work and you work properly for a whole month, you get a big bonus. And then we found out at the end of the month, those who got the bonus disappeared for a week.
Exactly.
So it's a learning. We tried all sorts of different things to get the safety standards up, and we got them up, but it's a learning curve.
Yeah, let me give you an example of how you ramp up people from not being ready. So I mentioned that that 10% ceiling on cost recovery, and for my sins, I was hired by one of the companies to be exploration manager. And we were faced with this dilemma. We had 30-something geologists, geophysicists, technicians working in Houston, and we couldn't cost recover them. So we decided, let's bring them to Trinidad. Yeah. And as soon as we came to Trinidad, we found that they were expensive to maintain. So we said, let's hire locals, but there were none. So you know what we had to do? We had to design, build, and participate in running a petroleum geoscience program at the University of the West Indies in St. Augustine. That program was designed with the industry needs in mind. The teachers came from industry, so the content and the delivery was current. And because it was such high demand, because we were giving scholarships at the time. At that time, China government wasn't paying for the university. We were giving scholarships, we were giving mentorships and a chance of jobs. We got some of the best candidates in the country from A-level high school to apply for that. And during the second year of that program, it became the hardest department in engineering to enter. By the third year, it was harder to get into that program than into medicine. It required all A's. What it meant is that when those students graduated, they got some bright kids in with a very good program. They were grabbed up by the companies, and they very quickly shot up the ranks of the companies internationally. And they were in demand by the companies, the parent companies. And those graduates have gone on to do fantastic things. Some of them, one of those discovered was led the team that discovered one of the biggest oil fields discovered for decades in the Gulf of Mexico. These people have done really well. We created a world-class training facility at UWI just because we had that demand. Yeah, Guyana could do that easily. Yeah, so you can do a lot. You put your mind to it.
Yeah, and we have about 7-8 minutes more to go for program time, and I wanted to ask a few more questions, get in before our time runs out. Local content policy, is that the end of it all, or do we need legislation? From my reading and from feedback that I'm getting from players in industry, is that our current legislation for oil and gas is 1986 or 1990 thereabout. Is there an urgent need? Again, we are just a few months away from first oil, and we are still talking local content policy that needs to be drafted and approved. And we are talking about legislation that might be, 30, 40 years old. Do we need legislation to help support the local content policy?
Let me take that. Let me start with that. So in my view, you can operate with or without a policy, with or without legislation. What you get, however, is dependent on how capable your regulator is, how clear your vision is. My recommendation would be that, one, companies say do not regulate. Let's take things flexible. My experience is flexibility means it's like an arm wrestling. You're flexible, but guess who wins every time? The stronger guy. Yeah. If you're negotiating from a strong company and a weak regulator, you will lose. Mm-hmm. So what does legislation do? Legislation helps the regulator. Why? Because it draws on expert knowledge to say, these are the rules that we will follow, right? Mm-hmm. So the rules are there, developed by experts who understand the industry. Secondly, every participant coming in is clear what the rules are. Absolutely, so when you engage, when you're contracting, you know beforehand what they're coming into. Yeah, people who are there know what the rules are. The regulator isn't given the flexibility. Flexibility in governance in countries like ours leads to the weakest link in the chain being the point of access of those who want to breach the rules. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in our countries, without transparency, without accountability, governance breaks down. Regulations give you some control. It gives clarity, right? In my view, it supports regulators who are weaker. It makes people not have to think about doing the same thing different ways every time, so they can use their time more efficiently.
But come back to Guyana, is our current legislation, which is 30, 40 years old, is it robust enough to make us, balance the arm wrestling?
So you need modern legislation. You need regulations that are specific to the activity set you're considering. So you need regulations for local content. But even beyond that, you need more tools. So you need, for instance, as we did in Trinidad when we were building the Atlantic LNG trains, we said to the company, fine, let's look at your work program. Let's look at the activities involved in that. Let's look at the inputs to that. And we said, you're going to have 80% local content in civil works. Because you have people here who can do that. You're going to have so much percent in electrical. So you match the demand against the supply. And then you say, you're going to operate this plant for what, 20 years? You need researching equipment, you need compressors. We need to build capacity in local companies to do that. So we got GE to build a turbine repair shop in Trinidad to manage those turbines for the LNG. So so you have to have expertise to analyze the demand and supply and put your rules in place to match that. This is not cut and paste by any means. This is experts applying the knowledge.
you were helped to set up the Department of Energy, and you were an advisor and so on. Did legislation come up in your discussion during that year?
Yeah, so all the legislation needs to be updated. You know, the 1986 or whatever piece you talk about, that needs to be updated. And that's on the radar. You know, we recognize that we need the framework. You know, it's not about a petroleum commission bill and a local content policy and then a natural resource fund. There needs to be an umbrella over that. We don't have that umbrella, an updated umbrella. So we need that framework, and then we need these other pieces of legislation, new pieces of legislation under that. That all has to be done. The natural resource, the Petroleum Commission bill, you know, one of my tasks there was to get that recycled because the first draft wasn't good. I haven't seen the second draft. The natural resource fund, that came to Parliament, but, you know, it came to Parliament in January when only half Parliament was there. So that's probably will need revisiting as well. Yeah. So it's probably still early days with regard to the legislation. All of these things still need to be worked on.
Absolutely. And going to my few final questions now. Today is September 18th. I think it was supposed to be the last day of the current administration, and supposedly illegal from tomorrow. I'm not a legal guy. I'm not part of the PPP or the PNC, so I don't have a stake in either direction. But it's a volatile political situation. It can escalate depending on what happens tomorrow when GCOM comes out and make a statement on their readiness for the election. What impact would an unstable political situation mean for Guyana and oil in the next year? We've had 1 year of this political turmoil. We could possibly get it for another year. What would it mean for the oil and gas sector? And of course, local content.
You want to take that, Ian? Let me, as an outsider, kind of give you my sense. So the industry and its activities transcend political cycles. Yeah, the impact is beyond party or partisan politics. Guyana's constitution provides for joint oversight of managing the sector through a committee of the national parliament. Yeah, so that has some rule. At the moment, it doesn't have the capability, and that's one of the things that needs to be built up. So the parliamentary committee needs to have the capacity to oversee the operation. Because it's bilateral, you know, it means that whatever party comes to power has to report it. The companies know that they have to have good relationships with whoever's in government, and they work on that. Yeah, so they keep that going. Now, I don't think anybody in either party wants to work against Guyana's best interests. You know, we tend not to trust politicians. You know, my sense is that people make bad decisions for one of three reasons: ignorance or lack of knowledge, lack of experience, greed, or fear. And not be greedy on their own side, maybe that's somebody else's greed. Or fear, and it can be fear of the unknown. Yeah? I believe a lot of people, in fact, some research was done on this. A lot of money was lost in Africa. Not through corruption, not as much through corruption as through lack of capability. Yeah? And that is why it's important, I think, for a country like Guyana to get all parties to understand the sector. Like I said, get an agreement.
That's the million-dollar question. That's the million-dollar question, to get all parties on a table to sit and talk. And Dr. Yan,
important.
Your thoughts on the political situation and how that can impact the next year?
Yeah, it doesn't make Guyana stronger. The instability makes Guyana weaker. However, Exxon and these large oil companies, they've done this over and over and over in much worse situations.
Is it in their advantage, maybe, for countries to be unstable?
Well, you look at, I mean, why would, say, Exxon or some of these companies stay in places with civil wars going on and still make huge profits? So it doesn't damage them. They do quite well. A weak government or a weakened. But
we are talking local content. So we're talking from a Guyanese perspective. how would it affect that welder that wants to get a job in the oil and gas sector, or that business guy, Nicholas Wire, who wants to ensure that, the 10, 15, 20 companies in Guyana gets into the business of oil?
So the work still needs to be done, and people will still be hired. However, the lack of clear direction and unity is affecting Guyana, and will slow the progress down for Guyana.
Absolutely. Okay, so now for maybe some closing remarks, before we go to the poll and we end the show, your final comments on my question is Guyana ready for oil? And if not, then what do we need to do within the next 90 days?
Guyana certainly has a lot of work to do still. To me, one of the most important things Guyana could do is to have open conversations among its people and have clear leadership and start shaping a sense of direction of where it wants to go. And, in 90 days, somebody needs to work on getting the parties to say, what do we agree on, first of all? And they can disagree on other things after that.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Yan, is Guyana ready for oil? And if not, what do we need to put in place?
It would be highly unlikely that we would ever have been ready for oil. This is more a case of trying to, not to forfeit too much value, to try to keep things under control. It's not so much a case of maximizing value, but of trying to reduce value leakage. And what can be done? We talk about leaders, and our leaders need to unite, but I kind of look at it from the bottom up. I think that people need to start getting a bit more active, and Guyanese have come a long way. In 2 years, since these contracts were released, look at all the debate that's going on. That's a great thing. That's very healthy. We're seeing a lot of discussion in the press. This is all very healthy stuff. So I just hope to see more of that, and hopefully some consensus can build.
Well, thank you, Dr. Yan, and thank you, Mr. Anthony, for sharing your last 90 minutes with our viewers and myself and the Globespan team. We really appreciate it. The discussion was very healthy, and I'm hoping that those who are stakeholders and decision makers in Guyana can listen to you guys many more times and as often as possible. You do have tremendous strength in this area, and we do appreciate every moment that you spend in trying to help Guyanese at every level with the oil sector. With that, I want to go back to Devin, who may have a result of a poll that we had started from the beginning of the show. Devin, do you have those results?
Yes. So the question again was, do you believe Guyana is ready for oil? 18% said yes, and 82% of people said no. Thank you.
Well, there you have it. 82% of Guyanese or viewers believe that we are not ready. And you can have all the fancy talk about policy and legislation and capacity building, but if it's not trickling down to the welder, to Mr. Joe Welder, then we are in trouble again. With that, I want to say thank you again to all the viewers for taking the time out. For those of you who missed cricket, thank you double for tuning in and listening to learn a bit about what could happen to Guyana's future, good, bad, and of course indifference. Thank you again, and good night, and have a wonderful rest of week and weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good